Hey guys, remember to like the video and hit subscribe.
We should find common ground with people who support a justice. That's
You
unacceptable.
make peace
That
with
is
your
never-
enemies, not with your friends.
No, we do not make peace with people who are murdering children. Answer me that. Who put your parents in Gaza?
Between 1948
You're
and
not gonna
67 and 1967.
You've dodged everyone.
Wait,
Between
Peace with people who... You're not...
Us, this is the
family members and Palestinians.
this is the extremist view. We are not extremists.
My name is Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib. I'm a Palestinian American who grew up in Gaza, where I lost immediate and extended family members in the war. Since October 7th, I've been on a mission to delegitimize Hamas and promote a pragmatic pathway forward away from violence and toward peace and coexistence. And I am surrounded by 20 pro-Palestine protesters. My first claim is that October 7th was an abhorrent disaster that unleashed the worst catastrophe in the Palestinian people's history.
okay, hold on, actually. October 7th was a disaster that opened the worst chapter in Palestinian history. I mean, I would probably fight and say the 48 War of Independence was probably the worst chapter, but okay. This will be a close second.
Hi, my name is Ahmed.
So, worst catastrophe. I think that you're using specific words for specific reasons. The Nakba, catastrophe, right? I want to offer my condolences. I believe that 33 members of your family were exterminated by the Zionist entity. So,
No handshake. Oh, did you
Catastrophe.
refuse? Right.
Hi, my name is Ahmed.
Ooh, no handshake. Damn.
so, right? I want to offer my condolences. I believe that 33 members of your family were exterminated by the Zionist entity. So, my question is, how is this worse than what initiated everything, which was the Nakba in 1948?
My grandparents were pushed out in 1948, where 700,000 Palestinians were unfortunately forced to leave their homes, and in some cases had no choice but to leave their homes. Since October 7th, over 2.1 million Palestinian people have had to leave their homes due to the catastrophe that Hamas's actions unleashed by attacking Israeli communities on October 7th. Quantitatively and qualitatively, Hamas's actions have triggered one of the worst catastrophes in the Palestinian people's history, whereby 50,000 Palestinians would still be alive had Hamas simply kept its soldiers at home on October 7th,
Right, so-
including family members of my own.
So, by that logic, if Zionists wouldn't have colonized Palestine, then none of this would have began to begin with, right?
As a Palestinian who grew up in the Gaza Strip, what I can tell you is that
Who put you there?
the Gaza Strip
put you there?
had immense potential to be the pride and joy of the Palestinian people, to prove that we are absolutely capable of having a functional state of our own that
I don't think you can. I don't think this argument survives. If October 7th was really bad, I feel like 48 is always going to be worse. The Nakba is always going to be worse. I don't know how you can make. I feel like this is untenable, but we'll see.
can rebuild our society, rebuild our heritage, reclaim our presence on the land.
The entirety of the land, or just because I believe your parents were in a refugee camp, right? They were forced into that.
There are nuances and complexities in
Well, who put
history.
them there?
Nuances and complexities
that's a very
in
objective thing.
in
Who put them
history
there?
that unfortunately
Zionists, right?
you unfortunately are not willing to listen to some of the nuances and the complexities. Do you know, for example,
Well,
that
just answer
in
that, like-
1948, the Arab armies that were
Like this guy's dodging a ton. The answer is, I mean, who put them there is kind of complicated, but I mean, they ended up there as a result of the 48 war, right? But
were coming in to supposedly save the Palestinian people. Ask
From whom?
Palestinians,
From whom?
ask
From the
Palestinians
Zionists
to leave.
occupied.
like I don't know why you can't just answer that. From who? From the Israeli army, right? Yeah.
Asked Palestinians to leave, disarmed Palestinians, and said, "Oh, this is a matter of 2 to 3 days."
So we agree that they should have been armed.
That's not my point. My point
You
is
said they
the
disarmed them as
history-
if it's a negative thing,
The
right?
history of the Nakba itself is so singularly focused on what happened from the point of view of Zionism and
Colonizers, right?
Whereas I actually want to understand what happened with the Arab failures that have
To
put
stop
us.
the failures to stop Zionism, right?
Why wasn't a
From colonizing
Palestinian
Palestine, right?
state? Why wasn't a Palestinian state established between 1948 and
Because the
1967?
British were in control of the region, and we know for a
That's absolutely not true, but
fact that the Palestinian revolt was in opposition to the British, right? So when people
Palestinian revolt was in opposition to the British, but that was in the late 30s. That was from like 36 to 39. That wasn't from 48 to 67. So
region, and we know for a fact that the Palestinian revolt was in opposition to the British, right? So when people talk about, oh, you know, we've been opposing colonization for 75 years since the Nakba, add another 30 for British colonization of the region. Is that incorrect?
not really opposing British colonization. I mean, it's weird to call it colonization. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. I mean, the country that they were part of before like ceased to exist. But
In 1948
No,
and
is it
1967.
incorrect that the British
Who was in
colonized the
charge
region?
between 1948
Is
and
that incorrect?
1967?
You haven't answered a single one of
he hasn't answered it. This guy should answer more questions. He's not really engaging with what this guy's saying. And this guy can be fought, but at least he knows a little bit about what's going on. But
my questions. I asked, who put your parents in Gaza? And you were unwilling to answer that. Can you at least answer me that? Who put your parents in Gaza?
Between 1948
You're
and
not
67 and 1967.
You've dodged every one of my questions.
It's not dodging so much.
Just, it's a very simple question. Who put your parents in a refugee camp?
On my mom's side, the Arab invading armies asked the invading armies to liberate the Palestinian people.
Why were they
asked
invading?
to supposedly stop the Zionist
From
invasion.
doing what?
From taking over the Palestinian people's lands in the areas that later on became Israel.
Okay, and you're okay with that?
I'm not okay with that.
Okay, so we should liberate that land.
80 years later, Israel is a recognized state that exists, that is recognized by the entirety of the international community. And this illusion that armed...
He did answer a question, though. He's just not answering the right answers. He's being pretty evasive. Like, you can just own that. In 48, the Palestinians were largely pushed out, or the Arabs were largely pushed out by the IDF. Well, post-Israel IDF, pre-Israel Haganah, Irgun, Lay, but...
resistance is going to get rid of 7 million Jewish Israelis. 7 million...
We're talking getting rid of the Zionist occupation, the Zionist entity itself, right? The colonial forces.
So do you believe that there should be a space for the Jewish people?
There always have been. What we're opposition to is, or opposing, I should say, is the Zionist entity itself. Why do Europeans have the right to colonize and impose a government on Palestinians? Why?
Well, I would say that we should ask that to the King of Jordan at the time.
He's not here.
Oh man, this guy sounds like a... I don't like to hate on people, but like, I'm always like very nervous of the, like, oh, I used to be Islam and now I'm an atheist and now my whole life is about, shitting on Muslims, or I used to be in this country and then I escaped and now my whole life is shitting on them. I feel like the guy on the left here, the Ahmed guy, is Fawad Al-Khatib, his narrative is way too on the Zionist side. Like, there are very, very easy concessions, especially in early history, that you can give where the Palestinians got pretty fucked. But
why? Well, I would say that we should ask that to the King of Jordan at the time.
He's not here, unfortunately.
At the time, we should ask the Arab armies that came to liberate the Palestinian people.
Why didn't they defeat the Zionists?
And ended up facilitating part of the Nakba by asking folks, my mom...
So you're blaming the Nakba on the Arab countries?
I'm blaming the failures of the Arabs and of the Palestinian leadership at the time in acting in the best interest of the Palestinian people, and then looking at 1948 to 1967. Why wasn't a Palestinian state established?
That is a good question, but the framing up to this has been way too in favor of Israel. Has been way more in favor of Israel than it needs to be.
Wasn't it until 1964 that at the Arab League summit that the decision was made to create the Palestinian Liberation Organization and to push for Palestinian statehood? Why was Jordan allowed to annex the West Bank and Egypt annex the Gaza Strip?
To be very clear, I'm against that, but that's a regional conflict, right? That's a regional... What I'm opposed to is Europeans thinking they could colonize Palestine. But that's a regional conflict, right? That's a regional... What I'm opposed to is Europeans thinking they could colonize Palestine.
Do you know
that's
that half of Jewish Israelis?
Right?
Do you know
I'm
that
not talking
half of
about...
Jewish
No, I'm talking
Israelis
about the originators of the Zionist project. Can we agree that they were Europeans?
Not entirely, no.
The majority?
Not entirely.
The majority secular...
The original ones were definitely Europeans. After 48 and 67, you get a bunch more... you get a bunch more non-European Jews that come in, but the original ones that all came were absolutely Europeans, European Jews.
There was certainly some elements of the Zionist movement that certainly emerged out of Europe. But I'm saying right now, I am thinking about the future. I'm thinking about Gaza. What happened in Gaza on October 7th was not because of Zionism.
What happened in Gaza on October 7th?
What happened with the attack that Hamas launched as a organization. You have taken an entirely different approach to thinking about October 7th. You have eaten up the Hamas propaganda that says October 7th happened because of Zionism.
And you're eating up the Zionist propaganda, right? I don't ever hear you bringing up, and I've seen many of your interviews, I don't see you ever bringing up the IOF, if you want to call them the IDF, the Haganah, where they came from, right? They started as a the IOF, if you want to call them the IDF, the Haganah.
Calling it the IOF, the Israeli Occupation Force instead of the Israeli Defense Force is cringe, but...
Where they came from, right? They started as a militia, did they not? Were they not killed?
Haganah? I don't know if I would agree with that. The Haganah started off as... I feel like the more radical elements of the early the early pre-Israeli forces that were more to nature were the Lehi and the Irgun, which there were like three branches to their military. The big one was the Haganah. I don't really think they were very in nature. The other two were more radical for sure. But also, it's also like kind of a dumb argument. I feel like everybody starts off as like terrorists, no? Like the U.S. military, the revolutionary forces, arguably the Boston Tea Party, right? You could say that's like a attack, kind of, right? Wouldn't you, in a way, right?
British soldiers? How is that irrelevant? That's where they came from, and they continue to impose that upon the Palestinian population. I ask you, why is it that in the West Bank, there's nobody stopping all the colonization?
Are you Palestinian? Are you Palestinian?
I'm Mexican.
But also, Like all of like if you want to talk about the Haganah, the Israeli military started off as terrorists in origin. Okay, well let's let's talk about where the PLO and everybody came from. Like that's all super origin, right? If you want to walk that path.
Have you lived in the Gaza Strip?
No,
Wow, Braxton, thanks for the 1999.
there's nobody stopping all the
Are
colonization
you
that's still
Palestinian?
occurring.
Are you Palestinian?
I'm Mexican.
Have you lived in the Gaza Strip?
No, when you were run out, right? When you aligned yourself with, what was that organization you're involved with? Because I know you work for the Atlantic Council right now, right?
Do you know anything about my history?
Yes, I do.
So tell me,
Your
what is my
parents-
history?
Are you interested in all the riots in California right now? Yeah, we'll probably do that after this video. I need to look into that because I think I'm going to do an interview tomorrow about it.
Were forced into Gaza, were they not? They grew up in a refugee camp, were they not?
Do you know anything about Hamas and how it treats Palestinians in the Gaza Strip? Do you know
Not
anything?
Genuine question. How is the establishment of a Jewish state in the 40s justified? Because the Jewish people got a guarantee from the British government that that there would be a place carved out for them should the Ottoman Empire lose the war and dissolve as a country, that there would be a place for them created somewhere where they'd be able to go and live. The British government made that promise to them. The Ottoman Empire lost World War I. Multiple huge empires. What are they all? Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire like collapsed, right? Lenin and all that happened right after World War I, right? There was a ton of collapse and reshuffling, reorganizing of countries around the world after World War I.
They grew up in a refugee camp, were they not?
Do you know anything about Hamas and how it treats Palestinians in the Gaza Strip? Do you know
Not
anything?
worse than Israelis and Zionists treat them.
Do you know that in the past 2 days,
we agree.
Hamas executed dozens of Palestinians who were hungry, who were desperate,
Oh, the German Empire, sure.
as Hamas was looting.
Dozens of Palestinians, meanwhile, the Zionist entity
Pause.
exterminated 33 of your family members.
Pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Just being a little devil's advocate, is there anything that says we have to honor what the extinct British Empire promised? Not necessarily, but I mean, but like if we get rid of old promises, we look at what's on the ground now. What are we going to reshuffle everybody there now? Like, I don't know.
Hi, Daniel. My name's Ahmed.
Daniel, nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit.
Please.
You said that October 7th was one of the most detrimental things to Palestinians, correct? I would beg to differ.
Did Arab Palestinians get a promised country, or were they always under the rule of someone else? The Arab Palestinians didn't really get a promise of a country. They kind of sort of alluded to it a few times, and that they didn't really secure anything. But Arabs were just never as, like, I guess, politically minded as Europeans were. That was more of a structure of like the composition of Europe and everything at the time. Like that, these were like having countries with governments and everything. So I think the Arabs just weren't playing political games like that yet, basically.
October 7th was one of the most detrimental things to Palestinians, correct? I would beg to differ because I think the fact that, also, let's not pretend like October 7th was an isolated incident. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came after years and years and years of occupation, oppression, and siege, okay? So on October 7th, when the resistance took place, because it wasn't an isolated incident, it also happened to take place during a time where social media was rampant. So for the first time in a really long time, Palestine was in every conversation. Most everybody that you know could talk about Palestine in one way or another. They knew about what was going on, and for the first time, we are hearing people recognize how detrimental the IDF has been and the occupation has been in history. And I think that the fact that it took place during a time where social media was at its height, we're seeing people on the ground, we're seeing people take videos of the rubble of their homes, we're seeing people have to makeshift water filters so that they can have drinkable water.
Yeah, and like, where has that gotten us? Has that furthered anything, I guess, other than, I mean, I guess in a funny way, I guess that's always been my claim about lefties is that they just like to talk about shit. I mean, I guess we've got to talk about it and tweet about it a lot more, but.
We are seeing children get shot for collecting rainwater. We are seeing children dying and starving and emaciated infants. And for the first time, it's not just on the news. It's on your phone. We're watching a take place on our phones, and most everybody is talking about it. So how can you say that October 7th was so detrimental to the Palestinians when it is the first time that it has been brought to heightened media attention?
Well, I share your horror in what's happening in Gaza. I mean, it is an unimaginable level of death and destruction and pain and suffering and hunger. And in some cases, I mean, people like being burnt in their tents and all the really horrible level atrocities that I have called out. And I have said that the Israeli government and military have committed war crimes. I've actually like overtly said that.
I mean, it doesn't take much to recognize that.
But my point is, I don't want my people and my family and my community and my beautiful Gaza that has meant so much to the Palestinian people there and to what remains of my family to merely become a social media phenomenon where it is on display for people to look at and say, wow, look at this, is so horrible.
That's the only way. That's the only way that they can get people to recognize just how bad it really is, because there is no mainstream media covering what has been going on for 80 years. It's all
of me and my community and my beautiful Gaza that has meant so much to the Palestinian people there and to what remains of my family to merely become a social media phenomenon where it is on display for people to look at and say, wow, look at this, is so
That's
horrible.
the only way. That's the only way that they can get people to recognize just.
Like, again, I'm sympathetic towards people being young, but there is this whole thing called politics that you can engage in. I guess in a way, this is like, it's the perfect encapsulation. It really is the perfect encapsulation of like the lefty mind. The only way to win is through TikToks. Like, well, you could have political leaders that engage in statesmanship, negotiations with other political leaders to try to carve out an actual agreement. Like, you know, there are actual ways that you can do things that don't just involve getting the most viral clip on TikTok, right?
How bad it really is, because there is no mainstream media covering what has been going on for 80 years. It's all skewed media.
So may I just clarify, because that, if so, that sounds really awful what I just heard you say. You're saying that you want to see images of dead Palestinians.
Yep.
You want to
No
see...
one wants to see those images, but if that's what it takes to get people to recognize what's actually going on instead of another Middle Eastern war, then that's what it takes. It's tragic that
So
that's what it took.
Do you not recognize that Hamas, in official communiques, has and publicly and overtly has made it clear that part of their strategy relies on causing maximum death and destruction in Gaza, so that the ensuing
in
imagery...
response to Netanyahu blatantly saying that his goal is ethnic cleansing.
May I just finish this point, please? That Hamas wants to generate maximum death and destruction on the ground in Gaza in hopes that the ensuing imagery can actually rile up the international community, rile up folks in the Western diaspora on college campuses, so that then this could delegitimize Israel, so that this could stop the war. I'm talking about facts on the ground as somebody who has so much attachment to the reality of Gaza on a daily basis. My brother is there right now running one of the biggest medical NGOs. He has 70 direct reports that are doing work that's saving lives. I hear from folks from the protesters.
There wouldn't be
Hamas.
lives to save if there was no occupation.
How about
your brother would not have to run an NGO if the occupation never existed and they weren't constantly bombing and killing children.
My brother was...
Like, it's like, okay, like, we wouldn't need police officers if there was just no crime. We wouldn't need jails if there were no criminals. Like, okay, like, but that sounds nice, I guess. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna get there?
Is there.
Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your
Thank you very much, Dana. Hi, Evan. Nice to meet you. Good to meet you as well.
So I think one of the issues with your framing in that October 7th is leading to what we're saying today in Gaza is the explanation that what is happening is inevitable. Are not inevitable. This is the first armed conflict since the Rwandan, in which the majority of deaths overall are women and children. The October of Gaza had some of the worst bombing campaign that we've seen since the Korean War or World War II. This type of level of destruction is not inevitable. This shows the explicit aims of the Israeli war cabinet, which they have explicitly endorsed as being a part of, for example, Trump's proposed plan of ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip. The goal, for example, right now, the complete blockage of food and aid is to make Gaza uninhabitable. We cannot say that this is an inevitable consequence of armed resistance, which armed resistance is an inevitable consequence of occupation. What makes Hamas's argument for armed resistance is the fact that in the West Bank, where the PA operates as basically an administrative state for the Israeli government and actually goes insofar as to protect settlers, what that actually does is it functions as to make the case for Hamas to have instances of armed resistance. For the last two, you brought up why we haven't had like a Palestinian state. For the last 2 decades, Israel hasn't even been interested in that. And that's even to say that they were, for example, interested in within the Oslo period, which I don't think was actually the case.
So the fact on the ground remains that 50,000 Palestinians would still be alive had Hamas made a different choice, but had they simply kept their fighters at home on October 7th. I recognize the imbalance of power dynamics between Palestinians and Israelis, but with clearly the Israelis, if I may finish this point, sure. Within said imbalance, there exists plenty of room for Palestinian agency and accountability and responsibility, such that October 7th was a choice. It was not an inevitability.
But you think the 50,000 Palestinians that are you're saying that that's an inevitability, though, and I'm saying that no.
Not
is inevitable. But that's exactly the framing of the point that you just brought up, is you said that October 7th is what's causing what's happening right now in Gaza. What's causing what's happening right now in Gaza is the Israeli state.
Hamas served our people, the defenseless Palestinian people, on a silver platter to the most far-right government in Israel's history. What did you expect would happen?
Actually, Israel served that. They did everything they could to undermine Fatah and support groups like Hamas. So
well, I'm glad you brought that point up, because what happens in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza. The fact that Hamas was propped up by the Netanyahu government and by the Netanyahu regime should tell you everything you need to understand to delegitimize this group, to understand that they were used to undermine the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which I don't subscribe to the Palestinian Authorities, sure. The entirety of their approaches, but the Palestinian Authority was the closest thing we had.
Fact check. Yeah, that Netanyahu allowed foreign cash to go into the Gaza Strip. Yeah, from Qatar.
To a political framework that in the 90s, when I lived in Gaza and I experienced the tail end of the Oslo peace process, a time of immense hope and optimism we went from having to meet peace and coexistence with Israel and pragmatism meant that we shed the Egyptian travel document and we got a Palestinian passport. It meant that we had an airport in the Gaza Strip. We flew in, my family and I, in 1999 and in 2000 on the Palestinian Airlines.
Sure.
That was undermined by failures on the Palestinian leadership side and by Hamas's rise.
Sure.
Meant that we shed the Egypt having to me peace process, a time of immense hope and optimism we went from having to me peace and coexistence with Israel and pragmatism meant that we shed the Egyptian travel document and we got a Palestinian passport. It meant that we had an airport in the Gaza Strip. We flew in, my family and I, in 1999 and in 2000 on the Palestinian Airlines.
Sure.
Wait, what's his background? Is he Egyptian or is his family from the Gaza Strip? Or did they just have travel documents from Egypt because of pre-67? I don't understand. Thought Gaza? Okay. All right.
That was undermined by failures on the Palestinian leadership side and by Hamas's rise to undermine the Palestinian nonviolent approach.
I'll be the first to say I think Palestinians have every right to criticize their own leadership. I think that
All right,
you can
pause.
it's always good.
Sorry, you've been voted out. Please return
Thank
to
you
your
very much.
seat.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Hi, Josh. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Okay, so I think you use language very loosely. We said and we said colonization, and you said taking over. You say so many things to diminish the words and the language. You use your personal experience, which is horrible, and your terms is abhorrent. You should never have to deal with that. But to place the onus on Hamas is so despicable because the reason that Hamas is there, you just said, was propped up by Israel. Why were they propped up? Because they wanted to take out the PLO. Why did they want to take out the PLO? Because they were actually going to create some dissonance with Israel. Another thing you have failed to mention is U.S. intervention on leading Israel. You just said was propped up by Israel. Why were they propped up? Because they wanted to take out the PLO. Why did they want to take Oh, despicable because the reason that Hamas is there, you just said, was propped up by Israel. Why were they propped up? Because they wanted to take out the PLO. Why did they want to take out the PLO? Because they were actually going to create
None of this is really true at all, but okay.
some dissonance with Israel. Another thing you have failed to mention is U.S. intervention on leading Israel, the veto power of the P5. When you said Palestine has not been legitimized, why is that? How many times has it been brought up to the supposed council, right? And been voted out by who? Who opposes it? 98% of the time it's the United States with the P5 veto power because they want to have a party like the Saudis and the Israelis in order to take control of the Swana region. And another thing you said, you wanted to utilize and place blame and shift blame to the Arab people during all these catastrophes. Yes, it's after the Millet system and after the government that were getting propped from World War II, people were just scrambling, trying to figure out how to live. And when you had European colonization shifting lines to create boundaries in order to say, this is now Palestine, this is now this is now that, of course, people are going to be groveling, trying to figure out how to do it. And you used Jordan. What did Israel do to Jordan and to Palestine? In 3 days, mind you. 3 days, they bombed the crap out of them and took their land, took the Golan Heights, took this and that. This is not a one-time occurrence, and this is happening. It's going to continue.
The Golan Heights was taken from Syria, but whatever. Jordan, attacked first. Israel told Jordan not to attack. During the Six-Day War in 67, Israel overwhelmingly defeated a coalition of Arab states, which includes Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. During a battle, Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria. Sure, okay.
Continue happening. And armed resistance is necessary because Fanon said that the colonized can only liberate themselves through armed resistance. And you want to delegitimize Hamas, but that makes no sense to me. We use the term terrorist. Terrorist now makes it so Hamas can't even plead for help because if you're labeled a terrorist, you can't go to the UN, you can't go to this and that. And let me tell you one thing. This one thing I'll say is one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
All right. So time is up. I'm going to ask you to return to your seat.
Thank you.
Surrounded is now a podcast, available wherever you listen. Search Surrounded, plug in, and stay part of the conversation. Anywhere, anytime.
My next claim is that armed resistance will get the Palestinians nowhere. Hamas's is not a viable path to statehood.
That's true.
Nice to meet you, brother.
Hey.
Thank you.
So I want to do two things before we start. First is I'll answer probably some of the questions you'll ask me. I'm not Palestinian. I'm also not infallible. So I hope I get fact-checking this because my biggest objective is to try to get to objective truth. And what I do know objectively is that the apartheid and the oppression that's been happening for the past 75 years is not something that's sustainable within the region of Gaza. So I think the claim is...
Why did Netanyahu permit Qatari funds to help with Hamas in Gaza? Surely their best tactic would be to create a solid and secure border with Gaza and just let the people in Gaza sort their shit out. I think it was to do with the fact that... not Ahmed Dibi, Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and the PLO didn't want to fund basically the Gaza Strip. They kind of wanted the Gaza Strip to fail with Hamas and to choke them and starve them out of money. And Netanyahu didn't want that because he didn't want basically the Gaza Strip to basically like completely collapse and then have to go in with the military, clean it up, and then just give it to Abbas afterwards. So the gambit that Netanyahu made was fine. I'll let Qatari funds come in to keep them sustained since, Abbas and the West Bank Palestinian Authority doesn't really want to keep them, living. Either way, it would have been a lose-lose for Israel, but it's just that people are playing politics with each other, basically.
is precisely worded in a way to make it seem like anyone that sits here is saying, I support every single action that's done by Hamas. And I want to make clear that my big reason on sitting in contention to your claim is to say that the framing is very intentional. And the moral outrage that's put on colonized resistance is doing the bidding of Israel and the oppression structure. So it's important to me to recognize what are the real causes of these types of violence. It's a state that does not allow aid. It controls the food and water. It has restrictive access to people's freedom of movement. It's controlling the ports. And the list could go on and on about why people feel like they have no other means in order to fight back. You said in the claim, armed resistance is not an effective strategy. What are we seeing with the nonviolent actions? The BDS movement has been condemned internationally by many different states. This is not something that's going to lead to the liberation of Palestinian people. We need to challenge the power structure of the United States and its support of a regime like Israel. That's the only way to stop violence that continues to occur within both regions.
Well, I really do appreciate your concern for the Palestinian people, and we need non-Palestinian allies to be a part of the broader effort, and we need a multi-pronged strategy. My thing with armed resistance is that as the weaker party in a conflict like what we're seeing in Israel and Palestine, particularly in the Gaza Strip, where you have a vulnerable population that has been under, on the one hand, an sense of isolation for almost 2 decades, and on the other hand, the control of a nefarious organization and that has Islamized the society, if I may finish please, that has pushed the Palestinian people to the brink of catastrophe. I think there's an extra onus. I am a believer that you have a responsibility, you being Hamas and Palestinian leadership, have a responsibility to be a good custodian of your people. You do not poke a government that has Ben Gvir and Smotrich in it and carry out the single worst attack on the Jewish people since the
I want to turn on the news right now. LA. I don't know what's happening in LA. We'll do the LA stuff after this, okay?
And expect things not to go horribly for you. So that's number one. Number two is the monopolizing of the word resistance. And I added armed resistance because guess what? Of course I believe in different forms of resistance. Unfortunately, in today's context, the word resistance has become monopolized to almost exclusively mean Hamas and violence and terrorism.
I have to interject here, and I appreciate everything that you've said, but if you've seen even in demonstrations in Gaza, there have been multiple protests saying that Hamas is not effective leadership. So to say that Hamas is representative of the Palestinians' approval is not something that you can say wholeheartedly. Again, I think you focusing on Hamas is doing the bidding of Israel. We need to talk about how we're going to end the occupation. That needs to be done by...
How can we do that when Hamas is dominating the convo? What?
Multiple countries coming together in support of a people that's been oppressed for almost a century now.
That is a brilliant point that you just brought. That is precisely what I'm desperately
but your
trying
focus
to
here,
do.
and you're coming here is focusing on Hamas. Because October 7th is not an isolated event. You don't get October 7th without October 1948, without October 1967, and every day that's happened since then, under 75 days of occupation, suppression, and siege. The bombings, the indiscriminate killings of civilians is not something that's sustainable. And if you look proportionally at how many people died on October 7th, which I don't know how many people would justify civilian death, but if you look at those numbers versus what has been happening in Gaza since the occupation started, this is not a proportionate conflict. And I don't even like using the term conflict, because conflict, it assumes that there's two equal, equivocal positions. This is colony. It's colonization, and that's not something that's justified. Why are we critiquing the actions of the colonized people instead of those that are doing the colonizing in the first place?
I respectfully disagree with the idea that this didn't. I mean, this had a starting point, a tactical starting point on October 7th, whereby a specific act that was a choice triggered where we're at right now. And if I may,
I feel like this is a rehash of every Israeli-Palestinian argument I've ever done.
say what I'm.
It sounds like you're saying the best strategy of the Palestinian people is to lay back and just let Israel do what they want. You can't fight.
Why is that the only two? It's always the only two options. You can either lay back and do nothing, or you can murder civilians. Like it's the only two options. Always the only two options ever.
Back. You can't try to have any sort of action against your oppressors. Just take it. Take the genocide until they feel like they can get rid of it.
Thank you for coming through. Appreciate it.
voted out.
Appreciate it. Thank you, brother. I will. Thank you for coming.
So first off, my condolences to all your family members who you lost. I'm also from Gaza. I'm from the Aswad family. We're from Yafa as well, and I used to live in Gaza as well. I left in 2001 during the second Intifada, which I believe you were there, and nearly lost your life by an Israeli airstrike. Your two friends were killed in front of you, I believe, and this left you partially deaf. Am I correct? Hamas wasn't in charge at that time, were they?
They were rising, but no, they were not in charge. But they were very much so rising.
But so during this Intifada, which by the way I think Fatah and Palestinian Preventive Security have initiated this or added to it. But during this time, the PLO, the PA, Fatah was in charge of Gaza, and Israel is the one who killed your family. Israel is the one who killed your friends, right? Israel is the one who left you with PTSD, and I commend you for being public about that and sharing that information. But when I was there living in Gaza, I remember Mohammed al-Durra when he was killed. I was 3 years old. I vividly remember that. This is one of my earliest memories. All I can think of was why was this little boy killed in his father's lap, right? So, and again, who killed him? Israel. Israel is the reason why the Palestinians are suffering and have been suffering for over 77 years. So I wanted to talk about armed resistance because that was a claim. Armed resistance is a right under international law. We need to look at the reason why there's armed resistance in the first place, right? So context matters. So Israel, being the occupier, having a military occupation of Gaza.
This whole like oppressor-oppressee dynamic is also so boring to analyze everything through. Like it's always the oppressor oppressee, and then you like, so they're always right in everything. Ugh.
The West Bank, Israel increasing its settlements, Israel being an apartheid state, Israel making our lives hell, not looking at us as humans. This is the root cause of the issue, and armed resistance is a byproduct of all this garbage. Hamas formed in 1987 during the first Intifada, right? So they formed as an armed resistance group in 1987. There would be no need for resistance if there wasn't a military occupation. So you have anything to add?
No, and first of all, delighted to like finally speak to a fellow Gazan, like that. Even when we disagree, that to me is far more important than, with all due respect to some other allies that suck up the oxygen out of the room, that feel the need to speak over Palestinians, that act in a very disrespectful manner. I really I appreciate you being here. And so, do you know that in the 80s, when Hamas was born out of Mujamma al-Islami, the Islamic complex, their budget, what came out of the military governor, that the Israeli military system that ran the military occupation, their budget was literally allocated to them by the military governor. Their first victims for this resistance group in the 1980s were women in Shara Omar al-Mukhtar street to wear the hijab
Cheating.
to cover themselves up,
Speaking
and
that language.
suspected
No fair.
traitors and collaborators with the Israeli army and the Israeli police in the 1980s, before they laid a finger on an Israeli soldier or an Israeli
Okay. I don't think there's anything interesting in this